Hello, everyone. Welcome to this new episode of Swift Academy podcast. Today, we have a very special guest joining us from Canada, who is Dave Poirier, an expert in iOS mobile application development and also in mobile security. Dave works now at iVerify. He has a lot of experience on especially mobile security, helping developers and organizations around the world to protect their software for emerging threats. He also an active contributor to the tech community through his writing on Medium, and also he tried to share valuable insight on everything related to mobile security and best practice that can help developers and organizations. In today's episode, we will dive into the essential of mobile security, discuss the latest trends, and explore some of the key challenges that developers can face in keeping their application secure. We have a practical part in the end of this first episode so that we can explore a real example with Dave. Okay, without further ado, Dave, welcome to Swift Academy podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you, Dave. First of all, I have some questions about security mobile. I think that they are basic question for you about mobile security. And for you, what is mobile security first of all, and why it's so critical today in our digital landscape?
Well, I guess the first thing to realize is that mobile security is, in a lot of ways, not different than any other software security. About like networking servers and whatnot, we have to enable HTTPS, we have to do encryption, we have to validate our data. So there's a lot of commonality between the different types of software. There are some specific or more obvious issues when you are dealing with mobile software. For example, your devices are following you everywhere. You can leave them in a cafe, you can leave them anywhere, so they have to be locked. Or if they are unlocked, then you have to protect them as best as you can. You're not used to doing that, for example, with PC towers, Windows, like we used to have computers locked in an office. More nowadays, like people travel with laptops, with iPads, with tablets, with phones. So the security has changed a lot in the last 20 years. And I'd say even in the last 5 years, there's been significant changes to our understanding of what mobile security actually is. So we'll go over that for sure during the presentation today, but yeah.
Yes, great. From your point of view, there is no big difference between mobile security challenges and other critical for desktop, for desktop, etc. And for your point of view, what are the most common threats security that come in the mobile security, or what are the common that are threats that are specific to mobile applications?
Yeah, I think the biggest threat ever to any infrastructure, including mobile, is still the humans. We are the weakest link of everything. We get phishing, for example, is by far the largest source of threat, according to Zimperium's global threat survey from 2023.
Okay.
80% of all the threats or attacks were phishings or human-based attacks. Sending a message to someone saying, "Can you give me your authentication code for signing to the server?" Or "Can you password?" So as long as humans are in the loop, I think we will be the weakest links. We are gullible. We can be cheated. Now with AI, that can impersonate someone with video, live video presentation, whatnot. Like you can have a video chat with your CEO of the company, and it's not him, but you see him. He's reacting. He's live. You can see his video, but it's not him anymore. So I think the human factor is and will continue to be by far the biggest threat. Other than humans, I'd say data exfiltration and cloud storage. I think they are the biggest attack vectors right now, currently ongoing. Like you have in cloud storage on S3, the security settings are not set properly, so they access your S3 storage. That affects mobile apps because mobile apps very often store their backups to the cloud or upload to the cloud somewhere. And then there's low or lacking understanding in network security. Developers think that HTTPS is good enough, so as long as HTTPS is done, they consider that everything is good to go, which is by far not the case. And in the last few years, we saw things that we never considered before, supply chain attacks, where your dependencies of your apps get compromised. And as you build your app, you automatically include those compromises in your app. And that can affect millions of apps in one shot. Like if, for example, CocoaPods gets affected, then how many apps are using CocoaPods? And then you just build your app and suddenly you have how many apps that are being compromised just in one shot. So I think a supply chain attack are by far one of the also biggest threat that we have to deal with as mobile developers or as any software developers. And it's also one of the blind side. Many developers just don't think about it.
Yes, great. A lot of specificity to mobile security, but I think that there is a lot of confusion from my point of view about some terms, cryptography, encoding, etc. from security. And we have a question from LinkedIn about that, because people and developers have a lot of confusion about terms in security mobile.
Sure.
And cryptography, encoding, this kind of terms people use without make difference between them. Can you explain a little bit, because we are in an introduction for mobile security and maybe for security,
of course,
the difference between cryptography, encoding, etc. Maybe some terms that you said now about types of mobile threats. I think that 90% of developers doesn't have a lot of knowledge about them.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, cryptography. Cryptography is the bigger umbrella term that talks about anything that has to deal with data security, manipulation of data from one format, like plain text that humans can read, to encrypted, which is the form, or what we call ciphertext, which is the form that we can no longer understand what is the original source. So cryptography is the larger domain that encompasses all that. Within the cryptography, one of the first things that we learn is encryption, how to encrypt data. That is like how to take that data that's in plain text and transfer it to ciphertext. Now to get it back from ciphertext to plain text so we can read it again. Then there's hashing. Hashing is how do you take something and generate some kind of unique identifier so that if that something gets modified, we can compare against that identifier and verify whether or not it's still the same or not. So by hashing, I take like a password, I generate a hash of that password, and I know if you change a password or if you use a different password, the hash will be different. Even if you change just one little bit or one character, the hash will be completely different. Yes. So by using hashing, I'm able to know if you're using the same password or not, and I'm able to compare that. And I'm able to know that without sometime even knowing what the original password is. Because just if I have a script or something that gives me a hash as an output, then I can compare the two hashes and I can know the 2000 that the data changed, that it's not the same or it is the same, without ever having access to the original data. And a cryptographic hash, we call it cryptographic because it means that we cannot revert back to the original data. There's no way for us to extrapolate what the original data may be. We have a numerical identifier out of it, great, but we can't generate the original data from the identifier. And that differentiates from encryption, because in encryption, we take the plain text, we convert it
Yes.
into some gibberish ciphertext, and then we can get the original back. We can revert back. That's encryption, decryption. But when
Yes.
we use hashing, it's a one-way algorithm. So we take this large piece of thing and we generate an identifier from it, and there's no way for us to go back. Now, obviously, this is subject to change. Back in the 1990s, MD5 was one of the best hashing algorithms that we could use. And then people started having larger and larger and larger hard drive, and hackers figured out that there was a way for them to create
Mm.
MD5 lookup tables. So they
Okay.
started generating, like, taking any piece of data, generating an MD5 hash, and storing this MD5 hash. This is the data that generated it. And they kept doing that in a loop and built a huge database of MD5 lookup tables. So now you just have an MD5 and you send that to the server, and the server sends you the various alternative text that can potentially be what created that MD5. So if you have a password, for example, that is between 4 and 20 characters with letters and numbers and whatnot, that's super obvious. You just give an MD5, you're going to be able to get the password, the original password back from the MD5 hash. So because of that, MD5 is no longer considered secure. So over time, technology gets better, computers get faster, we get more storage, these kinds of attacks become possible. Right now, the hashing algorithms that are considered safe are SHA 256,
Yes.
SHA 512. They are much bigger than the MD5, and they are therefore harder for attackers to have those lookup tables. But it's important when you deal with cryptography in general, that topic, that you stay up to date, current, because it evolves. Sometimes it evolves very, very quickly. Sometimes it stays the same forever. For example, the concept of public-private keys has existed since the 1970s. It's still
Yes.
not generally used by a lot of apps, but the concept has been there for years.
Yes.
So there are some concepts like that that are very old, but at the same time, the exact library or the exact algorithms that we use or the exact modulation or they all vary over time. So it's important for us to stay up to date, to stay aware. The biggest coming change regarding cryptography will be quantum cryptography. These quantum computers that are being developed right now are getting mature fairly quickly, and we estimate that by 2030, breaking current encryption will be a matter of a few seconds. So you have any document that is encrypted with the current encryption by 2030 or 2035 maximum, according to current estimates, you'll just give that encrypted document to that quantum computer, and within seconds, you're going to have the decrypted document back without the encryption keys. So right now, the governments across the world, they're doing a lot of data capture. Even if they can't read the documents, if it's encrypted, they're going to keep it, because in 2030 or 2035, they're going to be able to read
Ah.
it.
Yes.
So there's a lot of spyware, a lot of malware going around, trying to
Oh,
capture
okay.
as much of the data that we can. Even if we cannot read it right now, it's fine. Just put it in storage, and in a few years from now, we're going to be able to decrypt it. So there's a lot of spyware and malware going around right now, which makes our job as software developer that much more important, because we can't just encrypt the data on disk and call it a day. We have to do everything we can to prevent the data from even leaking out.
Mm. Great introduction. A lot of concept. Thank you, Dave, for this explanation about this concept, because I think and that a lot of developers and people that listen or watch us have doesn't make the difference between hashable, cryptography, security in
You,
general,
you,
and
you did mention another term that I didn't touch at all, encoding.
okay, encoding.
Um,
Yes.
the
I
difference
forget.
between encrypting and encoding. Encrypting
Yes.
takes some ciphertext or some plain text and convert it into gibberish that we cannot understand.
Yes.
And unless you have the decryption keys, you cannot
Mm.
get the original data back.
Okay.
Encoding is quite different. Encoding takes the normal text, change
Yes.
the representation of that data into something else, but you can get the original back without any encryption keys. So you
Yes.
convert the format, you can change the representation, you can change it into base 62, base 64, base 32, and ROT13, or whatever encoding that you want. But
You didn't need the
you
key.
can get the data back.
Yes.
You can.
Yes.
It's not secure. It looks
Not sure.
different, but it's
Yes.
not secure because you can always get the original data back. So this is encoding. Encryption is where we take the data, convert it, but with a key, and then
using the key.
get the data back, you need that key. Without that key, you will never be able to get the data back unless you have quantum computers.
Yes, great. Thank you. Thank you to make this difference between encoding and encrypting. Okay, it's great. Now we have a lot of terms that we know about security, and you spoke about some threats like phishing, malware, man-in-the-middle attacks that we will discover in the practical part. And from your experience now, what are some real-world example of mobile security issues and that you can developer problem that developers can learn from them, what we call like breaches, something like that, security breach.
Well, some of the most recent breaches, for example, in one that is, I don't know if you're aware, but there's a conflict in Palestine right now. Israel is trying to take over parts of
Yes.
Palestine and whatnot. This is something that is for people out there going through this. But in end of July, beginning of August, Ismail Haniyeh got assassinated in Iran. And part of a story that came out from various sources is that it looks like the location of Ismail was found by WhatsApp. So somehow the hackers or the Israeli Mossad figured out where Ismail was based on his WhatsApp information. They got access to WhatsApp, or they hacked his phone and they were able to get the information out. Something happened. So this is one of the examples where it can be life-threatening. If your information, if your location, or if your phone is hacked, or if your software infrastructure is not safe, you can potentially die from it if someone really wants to kill you. So if you're a politician, or if you're an activist, if you are a terrorist, the security of your phone or in your infrastructure is critical and can be life-threatening if it doesn't work as expected. So this is a very recent example that happened. Before that as well, in July 2024, the Hacker News published an article mentioning that there was hundreds of thousands of malware apps on the Google Play Store, apps that when they run, they try to steal your one-time password that you receive via messages. So you authenticate to your banking site, or you authenticate somewhere else, you receive a message saying, here's my one-time password, or please enter your code. But these apps automatically grab your messages, extract the codes from it. So that means that if you have two-factor authentication on your account, the hacker goes to your account, try to sign in, and they are prompted for the two-factor authentication code. It's sent automatically to your mobile phone, and their app automatically grabs the authentication code, forwards it back to them, and they can enter it. So even if you have two-factor, these apps are grabbing your authentication codes and allowing the hackers to go in. So much for security, right? So there was thousands of apps like that were found on the Google Play Store on Android. They're doing that. Now, this is not possible on iPhone just because of the design of the system, but on Android, that was a very real thing that happened. So we need to find a way to defend against that. As app developer, we need to make sure that our app cannot be compromised by one of our supply chain dependency that we mentioned before.
Yes.
So all of this kind of ties in together, and there's a lot of different vectors that can compromise our app or can compromise our infrastructure. And without knowledge of what these are, it can be like going blind. But there are real threats that are active right now. Example where people got killed. Example of people got their identity stolen. The people got access to enterprise resources they shouldn't have. So these threats are real. They actually happen. According to some of the recent analytics that I have about, there's 1.5 billion mobile phones in India right now, and every month, 7% of these phones are gonna encounter a threat, either phishing, spyware, malware, an app. 7% of all mobile users every month in India are getting somehow attacked, either directly or indirectly. Either they visit a website that has some compromise that will try to take over the phone, or they install an app, or they get smishing or phishing. 7% of all mobile users every month. It's insane now what's going on. Now, That is the same everywhere throughout the world. There are different landscapes. For example, in India, there's a lot more Android phones than there are iPhones, and Android are less secure a little bit than iPhones by default. So there are demographics that will be more easily targeted. But that being said, the mobile attack landscape right now is super active, and one of the key reasons for that is there's, according to the Imperium Global Threat Survey from 2023, 60% of all enterprise endpoint access. So that means you have a business, you have an app that the business needs to access. These accesses are done from mobile phones, 60% of them. So now if you consider that 60% of all accesses to enterprise network or enterprise apps or endpoints are done from mobile phone, that means there's a lot of enterprise business and or company business. It's not just like you and me with our photos of our cats and our phones that are getting attacked. It's actually like companies behind the scenes that use mobile apps. And so sometimes I may be an employee of a company. I may have an app that allows me to connect my enterprise. I will get attacked, not because of the data that I have personally on my phone, but because of the access I can potentially have throughout the company. So people are sometimes not aware of that. They're like, man, I'm just a low person. I work as a receptionist at this doctor's office. But you know what? They want access to that doctor's office medical records. So maybe they'll get access to your phone and then get in.
Okay.
So these attack vectors and these things are actually happening. They're alive. There's a lot of activities in that field. So we cannot say, oh, it will never happen to me. You have a 7% chance every single month that you target. So saying that you're not going to be a target is no longer acceptable in today's world. You asked about like what you also mentioned some of the threat. So there's like malware. Malware is an app that you install that you think does something. For example, it may be a little game where you go and plant carrots, but behind the scene, the game actually tries to scan your file system on your phone to grab every file that it can. Or you install a baby monitor app. The baby monitor app asks to have access to your network to be able to detect the other baby monitor app. And you grant them access, but because you grant access to the network, now that baby monitor app can send and scan your network for every devices that exist, and then can potentially infect your Windows devices or your other devices that are on the network. So there's these cases that are part of the malware group. Then there's the spyware. The spyware, it's not as much as trying to get data, like it's not as much as trying to infect you or do something malicious. It's more trying to know what you are about. Who are you? Where are you going? What are you saying? It's used a lot for state actors, for example. When the foreign country wants to know what this other country is doing, China versus US or Russia or these kinds of things, it's used a lot. So they install the spyware on your phone. It's also, by the way, that's not just state actors. A jealous husband can install something on his wife's phone. Or a parent may install something on their kids' phones. That kind of spyware is installed everywhere. But spyware can turn on the microphone sometimes. They can track your location. They can track
video camera,
the camera, or these kinds of stuff. So there's all kind of spyware. Some of them that are legit because you installed them from the App Store. They're validated by Apple, but the user maybe the user doesn't know. For example, the dad can use his child phone. He unlocks it because the parents usually have access to their kids' phones, and then install an app, enables location sharing 24/7, and then shuts down the app. The kid doesn't know the app is installed and may not notice that the little blue thing at the top is enabled, like showing that your location is being shared. So if they don't know, maybe their location being tracked 24/7. It's perfectly legal. It's from the App Store, legit app, but being used as a spyware because location sharing is enabled. There's phishing. Phishing is when you receive a text message or you receive a phone call or a voice call or any kind of like communication that asks you, the user, to do something you probably should not be doing. Or they ask you for information. For example, someone calls you and say, we are from the IT department of the company. We just want to validate that we're speaking to you. We're going to send you a one-time password code and we will ask you to give us that code. So you're like, man, fine. They don't ask me for my password, so must be legit. Then you
No
receive a
problem.
code, give them the code, and suddenly they just hack your corporate network.
Mm.
So,
Yes, yes,
so,
yes, yes.
I mean, this is phishing. Then there's man in the middle. Man in the middle is when someone within the network, either like the actual like Wi-Fi cell phone tower, Wi-Fi network, or something like that, or maybe even a disgruntled employee working at the company receiving your communication. They are on the server itself. Maybe that's the man in the middle. Or maybe
Mm.
your phone has been configured to use a proxy server and the proxy
Yes,
server is watching on you.
yes,
Regardless of the path, if there's anyone along the way that can get access to your data, that's just called a man in the middle attack. And we're going to play with that a little bit later.
yes,
There is a denial of service. Denial of service is basically
yes,
when they send so many requests to your server infrastructure that the legit users can no longer do anything about it. We
yes,
see that all the time with Fortnite or like these games, like Counter Strike. They attack
yes.
the servers and then the users are blocked for 6 hours, 20 hours. Or Facebook
They
recently had
can't use.
an outage like that, denial of service.
Yes,
Um, there's brute force attack. Brute force attack is when you have a username and password, and then the hackers try to guess your password repeatedly.
mm.
If they're stupid enough to do that from a single computer, they'll quickly get blocked. Their IP address will likely get blocked by the provider. But
Yes,
if they're smart, they probably went on the dark web. They rented a botnet
yes,
with millions of computers worldwide, and they say hack that account. And then there's requests coming in from millions of places across the world to your account, all trying your password, a different password. And it doesn't take very long usually to break most passwords because we consider a password safe from a single computer in 20 years. But when you have 20 million computers trying to make access to your password at the same time, that time frame reduces significantly. So these botnets are for sale or for rent on the dark web, um,
mm.
sometimes for fairly cheap, like dollars on the hour.
Yes.
You just get
Sometimes
access to
for
them people's
yes,
account.
yes,
So this is brute force attack. There's stolen and seized devices. So for example, if you travel to the US and you're not a US citizen, the
mm.
border patrol can ask you to give your phone, and they can actually ask you to enter your code, your access to unlock the phone. If you
Yes.
unlock the phone and they plug it in, they can make a full backup of the file system.
Okay.
So you're at the border, you're traveling to the US, you want to play nice, they ask you to unlock your phone, they say, thank you very much, they plug it in, they get a full backup of your phone, and they walk away. So bye bye my
Mm.
files if they're not encrypted on top of the normal encryption, because part of iOS there's protection mode that you can enable,
Yes.
but protection mode is disabled as soon as the passcode is entered. So
Mm.
they just enter the passcode and they connect with the USB, and suddenly your files are no longer protected. So if you want to do security, that kind of stuff you have to be aware of. So stolen and seized devices with backups, access code, and then PIN codes, that's another vector. Um, there's data extraction, reverse engineering. So
Yes.
you have an app, store files onto your phone, and then hacker gets hold of the phone somehow, but the data is encrypted. They still need to have access to it. For example, a Telegram app. When you have
Yes.
Telegram, everything is super hardly encrypted and encoded and whatnot. But what they
Yes.
do is they reverse engineer the Telegram app. They run it
Yes.
into a logger, and then they do some reverse engineering. They figure out where the checks are, and then eventually they rerun the app as the user, and they get access to the entire database of messages in one shot because they reverse engineer and they ran some code and they did some method swizzling and whatnot. So data extraction, reverse engineering is another vector that we have to protect against. Then there's the jailbreaks. Jailbreaks is
Yes.
when a user purposefully decides to disable the security protection coming from the vendor. So they're like, oh, I have an iOS device, but I want to install apps that are not on the App Store. I want to
From
install
Cydia.
from Cydia. So I'm
Yes.
going to jailbreak my phone purposefully, break the Apple and break all the vendor security, and just install Cydia and then install app from anywhere I want. Well, guess what? You just made your phone and your own security like completely nil, my friend. You just like killed yourself.
Yes.
Sure, you can install the Cydia app and you can maybe install some of the games for free and whatnot. Great for you,
Mm.
man. But you just basically disabled all the security that the phone could provide for you.
Yes. Yes. Great.
Um, there's data leakage. So for example, when you include some third-party frameworks in your app, for example, Firebase Analytics, it starts to grab when you Firebase Analytics is awesome because when you're using UIKit, for example, when you navigate from one view controller to another view controller, Firebase somehow figure out you went from view controller A to view controller B, and it keeps track of navigation within your screen.
Everything.
It does everything. It figures out the name of the view controllers. It figures out what's on the screen. It can even do some of the frameworks. Analytics can also do heat maps. So they take screenshots of what's on the app and they where the users are tapping. So there's a lot of data leakage that can happen from those frameworks. So what's on the screen can be leaked automatically to the analytics, goes to the cloud, and that may not be secured as much as you want. Or what the name of the view controller, for example, if the name of your view controller is the name of a patient in a medical company, suddenly just by going into having a bunch of doctors using your app on Firebase Analytics, guess what? Your patients' names are all listed. That probably should not be reaching your analytics servers. Patient names should be confidential. So these kinds of data leakage can happen just by including a third-party framework that you may not be aware of. You see, you can do that yourself if you're not careful, but just by including some analytics framework, you can do that without knowing. There's insecure APIs. So you can have a server that offers you a bunch of different APIs. So let's say you have some management function, and so you have some user functions. The normal users only have access to the user functions, and you control the access between users and admin inside of your app. You have like an admin password in your app. So you enter the admin password, you gain privilege, and then you make the API calls to the admin functions of your server. But if the server does not check which user should be admin and which should not, and they just expect the app to be in control, an hacker that figures out which API are getting called in which scenario, now as soon as they get access, they will use the API calls directly, bypassing the restriction that was in the front end, in the client app. They'll bypass the restriction, they'll go straight to the API calls, and they'll get full admin access to everything. So if the APIs themselves are insecure, regardless of what security you put inside of your mobile app, if the APIs are not secure behind, you will get hacked. Sorry, there's a lot here, but
there's a lot.
session hijacking is another one. Where they get access to your token, and once they have your token, they can hack as you. There's intellectual property theft. So you have, for example, a custom algorithm inside of your app. You may be doing like, I don't know, image manipulation. You're erasing the background, for example, is one example that we saw in apps. You give them an image, and they erase all the background, all the magic happens, and then, whew, my image doesn't have a background anymore. Or I can replace it with a palm tree, or replace my background here, my wooden panel, forest. These kinds of algorithms can be proprietary. Some work better than others. And so by distributing your app on the App Store, people can just immediately reverse engineer and figure out what the algorithm is. So you can have IP theft. You can also have, like, for example, a document. You may have a signed contract or something that you scan as with a PDF scanner app, and that PDF is now sitting on your phone. And if it gets leaked, now people can read the content of your contract. Bypassing in-app purchase. You may have an app with a super great feature that people have to buy in order to get access to. But if people install the app outside of the App Store, or if they figure out a way to repackage your app, maybe they'll be able to bypass your in-app purchase step and just enable the feature all the time for free. So bypassing in-app purchase is another thing that we have to deal with. And the last one I'll cover is the two last ones are app redistribution. Kind of hinted about it already. It's when people grab your app from the App Store as is, and then they can use something like Feather or another tool, and they repackage your app, re-sign it as their app, and distribute it their own way maybe on a third-party app store, maybe via Cydia, maybe via something else. So they download the app straight from the App Store, they repackage it, and then they distribute it somewhere else, and suddenly users no longer have to pay. And then maybe in the meantime, they also modified your app so that those restrictions are no longer there, or the app does something, or maybe the app has been modified to even like snoop on you or spy on you or do something else. So app repackaging is a very big threat right now. And the one that we already mentioned before, supply chain attack, where one of your third-party dependency gets modified, and then that injects a whole host of things in your app. So all of these different vectors that I covered, there's a lot of them. So if you're not aware of all of them and how you can protect yourself against all of them, you are at risk.
Mm. I think great number of different threats. Thank you, Dave.
Sorry, I had prepared a list of all the different
Yes,
vectors.
no problem. And when you spoke about the difference between iOS and Android, I think there is a lot of difference in security mobile between
There is.
Android and iOS. From my point of view, and many developers think that iOS is more secure than Android, but I didn't have any knowledge about how Android make things and security in Android. And there is a role of what we call the operating system to protect you in your mobile application from some kinds of threats, not all, but from your point of view, what are the advantage, or I don't like to say advantage, what are the difference between iOS and Android in terms of security? Try something to summarize the main
Yeah.
things, the main difference.
The main difference is that Apple starts in a sandbox mode. Essentially, your app is restricted to its own data only by default.
Yes.
And on Android, it's on Android, it's also you also have a sandbox, so you're kind of protected. But it's how easy it is to get outside of the sandbox that is the major difference. On
Okay.
iOS, getting access to another app's files is nearly impossible. You cannot
Yes.
get access to another container. You can get permission to get access to the library, to the photos. You can get access to the geolocation. You can get access to system information, but you
Yes.
cannot easily get access to the entire files on the disk of the iPhone, for example. But on Android, all you have to do is declare one permission, and in the permission prompt that comes up when you first launch the app or install it on Android, the user grants you access, and then suddenly the app can do everything that it requested. So that can go from reading all the files to accessing your message history to getting your access to your password and like security settings, anything. Literally, almost anything can be done on Android. That's not possible on iOS. There's a lot of entitlements that are restricted or prevent that are only for Apple, and as an app developer, you cannot have access to those permissions. But on Google and Android, that's definitely possible. You just declare what permissions you want, and then if the user grants you access, you can go through. So the developers on Android have a lot more power. They can write tools that are like, for example, an antivirus. On Android, you can write an antivirus because you will have access to the entire file system. You will be able to scan all the files that are there to verify if there's viruses or not in them. On iOS, you cannot write an antivirus. If the user manually drags the file and send it to your app, you can check one file at a time.
Yes.
But the tool will not be able to scan all the files on your phone because that's not how iOS works. So there's limitations that are imposed by Apple that developers sometimes complain about. I want to be able to do this, but Apple doesn't let me. But at the same time, it's those same restrictions that make sure that your phone stays safe and secure. So when users jailbreak, all these restrictions are gone, and then the user can do everything that they do on Android and more. But then at the same time, all the protection that were there are no longer present.
And also, I think that the process of review in Apple differ from Android, and especially for security. Lastly, in this year, we have the introduction of, we call it the privacy process to check the confidentiality, etc. And for many developers, we spoke about what is the value of this privacy, etc. And so on for Apple, and people I think didn't know that the process of review and what make Apple, after you submit your application and you they approve the application, etc. They try to verify that, and in the preparation we speak about that, and I try to, maybe we share this knowledge for developers, for people that listen to us, about the process of review and how Apple do things to be sure that the privacy of the user it's secured.
Yeah. So first, legal disclaimer: I don't work at Apple or Google. I have no direct knowledge
Okay.
of how they operate.
Yes.
I'm all developers
Yes.
that survive the app reviews. So, but my point of view on the on the privacy labels that started coming up, the main point of that was to really make it possible for the end users to know what the app is capturing as or and using. For example, before we were seeing a game, and like, okay, I'm downloading this game, great, I'm playing it, but I had no idea, for example, that this game was tracking my behavior or tracking my location or associating me to a user account or sending me advertisements specific for my behavior. Nowadays, with the privacy label, you can see that your data usage is associated and tracked and provided to third party for advertisements. So the privacy label help the user make conscious choices. My wife is a perfect example of that. There's a lot of game that she went on the App Store to download, and then she looked at the privacy label. She's like, they want to capture my information and share it. They're probably like, no way, I just want to like play this game. And so she decided to remove those apps just because she doesn't want to have her privacy shared like that, like violated. So I think the privacy labels helped a lot on the users that want to have their privacy respected, make intelligent choices. Before those privacy labels, you pretty much had to investigate by yourself what these apps were doing. And obviously, you're going to say, well, the developer, it's a self-declaration that you're doing with the App Store. Yeah,
Yes.
to a certain degree, it is true. You are doing a self-declaration, but the Apple review process is also a little bit conscious about that. For example, let's say your app has a login with username and password, but you say you're not tracking user data. No, you are, because you're asking for their identifiers. So right away, Apple, during the review process, if they see that there's a login screen and you say that you're not tracking the user, they'll be like, no, change that. And we're rejecting your app until you declare the privacy label to match. Or if they see there's, for example, a very obvious advertisement framework inside of your app that displays ads to the user, and the most common ones are known to Apple. They have automatic analysis of whether or not you use certain features. So, for example, if your app sends a user ID to the advertising framework, they'll be able to detect it. So if you say I'm not sending tracking a user identity to the for advertisement in your privacy label, but your app actually does, they'll be able to flag it in most of the cases. So there's a lot of things like that that are done by the App Store review team to ensure that those labels are as accurate as possible. Obviously, there are instances in which the team are able to kind of fake their way through. But for the most part, because the users are so scared of the Apple review process,
Yes.
most of the time they will try to be as honest and as clear and as detailed as they can, just to avoid getting rejected by the App Store,
Yes.
or even worse, being found of having lied to the App Store review team and get banned from the App Store. Because if that's the worst case scenario, you have an app, you have millions of users, you lie about your privacy label, Apple figures out you did it on purpose, and then you get permanently banned from the App Store. And all your apps are immediately taken out. Your users are no longer able to get access to your stuff. I mean, this is the worst case scenario. So as app developers, this is our worst nightmare. So we don't want to end in that situation. So therefore, we're trying to be as transparent as we can with the Apple review team, and putting things under the rug is normally not recommended.
I think
On Android, the verification process is mostly automated. There are very small manual process happening, but this is why, for example, we saw news articles after news article in the last couple of years of like dozens, hundreds, and hundreds of thousands of apps, malware apps on the Google Play Store. So there's a reason why this is happening a lot more on Android. It's not just that the user can ask permissions. Like, it's not just that the developer have to ask the user's permission for sharing their stuff and they can get outside the sandbox. It's because the review process itself is lacking. Some very obvious fake app duplicates were on the App Store, on the Google Play Store. So users thought they were downloading Adobe, for example, or another commercial app, and then they ended up downloading that fake app that is repackaged with full of malware, spyware, that does exactly the same thing. So this is happening a lot on the Android ecosystem. You have to be very, very careful about that. And this is a direct outcome of the review process being less stringent and less rigorous than on the Apple side. So on the Apple, the Apple review times are a little bit longer, more chances of getting rejected, but at the same time, the quality that you get on the App Store is much better. And this is something that is really scaring me, what's happening in the EU right now, where they are starting to allow side loading of apps, loading apps that are not coming from the App Store,
Yes.
because that means that that review process is now gone, or partially gone at the very least. So now people will be able to install apps from other places that are not necessarily as reviewed or as stringent. And I'm concerned that there will be more malware, spyware, or just bloatware or apps that are doing more than they are claiming to do.
Okay, great. This is the difference, the main difference between Apple review and Android review. But people maybe didn't know that in Apple review we have a lot of process for what we call provisioning certification. And this provision and certification, it's not, it's great tools to secure our application, and especially the identity of the developer when we submit to the Apple Store. But as you said, there is some techniques using jailbreak, CDI, etc. To bypass this. But last time we spoke what we called an container that we can use, that hacker can use to make the same, to bypass the protection using by the provisioning and the certification. And can you explain more about that? Because really, I was amazed when you speak with me about, okay, but how they can do that? How they can create what we call a Docker, the same container with, to bypass the certification, the provisioning of the of Apple, which is specific for the developer, to be the same developer. Really,
Yeah, there's something called live container, and if you
live container.
live
Yes,
container, you're essentially able to run your iOS app as if it was running on a real iPhone protected by Apple and whatnot, but it's completely not at all.
yes,
So it can be on your desktop, it can be on anywhere. So you're running those apps. These apps think they're on an iPhone. They make keychain requests. They store files on the disk, and you think everything is as per, but you're really not running into an iOS device at all.
okay,
Or literally just running into a virtual environment fully in control of the person running the live container, and the app has no clue what's going on. So that allows you to do a lot of reverse engineering, forensic analysis, or having access to the underlying data.
Mm-hmm. Yes, great thing. Because people that said Android, okay, but you are good in Apple, no problem, etc. Yes, we have some, we can people hackers can bypass the main system of Apple.
I
Great
mean,
thing about.
there's some framework that Apple provide. One is called Device Check, and I mentioned it on LinkedIn this week.
Yes,
Or actually this week being September 15th week. Uh,
yes.
but
Okay.
the device check framework allows you to request a device certificate or a device token that uniquely guarantees that your app is actually from a device. Then you can send that to your server, and then your server can contact the Apple server to validate whether or not that's actually a true device. So when you're on a live container, that will no longer work, because the live container doesn't have the authority to fake a real authentication certificate from Apple. So
Yes.
the live container would provide you a token of some kind, and then you would send that to your server. Server would contact Apple, and Apple would say, that ain't one of us, and
Mm-hmm.
detect it. But if you're not careful and do that kind of work with a server, in collaboration with the server, then there's these kinds of attacks that are definitely possible. You use a live container, you run the app, and then it's a full virtual environment for your mobile app.
Okay, great. We end with this part about the difference between Android and iOS protection provided by the operating system,
Yep.
and we will go further with another section, other part. Maybe we have a full episode about that, about mistakes when we code application, mistakes in security when we code application, and we will have a special episode for that, a practical special episode for that. And for your point of view, what are the common mistakes that developers makes when we try to code for mobile application that may be used by hackers as to compromise the application or make different types of threats.
Yeah. The first one that is obvious is that most developers, they stop their security at making sure it's HTTPS enabled.
Okay.
My API is HTTPS. I'm good to go. Bye.
Okay.
That's probably 90% of the developers I came across in my life. They basically stop there. HTTPS is enabled. My app is secure. Bye. That's it. I'm done. Or if they are part of the other 10%, they're gonna store the tokens and everything else in the keychain, and then they're gonna call it a day. There's like 1 or 2% of developers, from my experience, that actually go past that, and there's that past that is huge. So, for example, encrypting your files on disk, and it's like doing when you receive a token from the server, you receive a GWT token. There's a
Yes.
signature in there that you can use to validate that the token is actually valid and it doesn't come from an attacker. So you can validate your stuff. You can encrypt your communication on top of HTTPS, because HTTPS is usually safe, but there are a lot of conditions where it isn't. A proxy server being configured on a device. It could be like an attack, like SSL bleed or hard bleed that occurred a few years ago. That suddenly all current SSL implementations are broken in one shot. These things happen, and when they do happen, it means that if you only rely on HTTPS, that's it. Your entire protection layer is gone, and it really doesn't protect against what we discussed about, like a data leakage. If your app is seized by the protection, the border authority, if you don't have file encryption on disk and you only do HTTPS, and then suddenly the border patrol or whoever makes a full backup of your device, they have access to all of your files. That's it. So there's these kinds of attacks that we have to protect against if you really want to develop a secure app. Now, obviously, not all apps need to be secure. If I'm making a grocery list, probably fine for me to not have a super secure app. But if I'm doing a jogging app, as stupid as that sounds, you will definitely want to make that app secure, because politicians, government employees, secret services, they also jog.
Okay.
So they will record their jogging routes, and if your app is not safe, then they can be tracked. So there's these kinds of things that we have to do. Is we have to do a full audit and security assessment of what we have in the app.
Yes.
So as developer, we have to identify all the things that we're storing, and then do like a worst case scenario analysis on all of these things. Like, what is the far-fetched worst case scenario that we can do with this, and do that with every little piece of information that you have: the location, the user's email address, the geolocation inside of an image. So can I upload an image from the camera roll to the cloud? Yes. Did you remove the metadata that includes the geolocation? No. Well, you should. So these kinds of things we need to be aware of, we need to do, and it's a lot more than just making sure HTTPS enabled. So the first thing is people just stop at HTTPS. That's the most common mistake. Second one is they believe that Keychain is safe by default. Do you know that if the user does not have a passcode on their device, the Keychain does absolutely nothing for you? It's not encrypted. So if there's no passcode, there's no encryption on iPhone. Simple as that. No passcode, no encryption. So when you ask file protection complete for storing a file on disk, if there's no passcode, file protection complete, bye-bye. If you use a keychain and it's store a password in there, or secret, or an API key in the keychain, and then suddenly it's not encrypted. So we have to verify, is there a passcode? Or you just say, you know what, I don't care if there's a passcode or not, I'm gonna do my own encryption and then store it into the keychain. Keychain, but it's already encrypted. So if the keychain is not encrypted, then you're good to go. But if you rely only on the keychain, or you rely only on file protection mode complete, and you don't do these extra validation to make sure that the passcode is actually set on the device, then you may be not protected at all, and you don't even know about it. So learning how the system works, very, very important. Understanding that these things happen, and how, like, when is the the file protection mode active and when is the file protection mode not active? Can I rely on it? So users thought most of the developers don't even know that stuff. They don't go that far and they don't learn about it. And then the second biggest mistake developers make in general is trusting their management team to know better than them.
Okay.
You go ask your manager, should I do this? The manager's like, I don't know. Or they will tell you, yes, you should. Or, nah, no worry, don't worry about it. We accept the risk. You accept the risk? Do you understand the risk? Have you done an analysis? Have you done an audit of what you're doing? I worked for the various teams, and in one of the instances, the users were like almost at the level of airplane pilots. Like they were like security gates and like very everything was super safe. And we were like literally taking their pieces of ID and sending them unencrypted on the cloud. I was like, how can we do that? And I spoke to management, and management was like, we accept the risk. So my passport getting scanned, uploaded to the cloud, unprotected. Oh my God, like what the hell? But this is happening in some companies, in some places. You ask management, like, and the management's like, yeah, we accept the risk. I'm like, they don't. They should at least inform the users. Hey, like you inform the user, hey, I'm gonna scan your passport. I'm gonna send it unencrypted to the cloud. Are you okay with that? Pretty sure most of the users would say, hey, no, hell no.
Yes.
But so trusting management is one of the biggest mistakes developers do. The backend developers and the mobile developers, everybody should just get together and say, we do an audit, we do an analysis. The legal privacy requirements say that this should be encrypted. We should encrypt it. And if management says no, we do it anyway.
Yes.
So trusting management is one of the biggest mistakes you can do. Trusting that they know what they are talking about, because very often they don't.
Yes.
So you have to get yourself very knowledgeable about GDPR requirements, privacy requirements, PIPEDA in Canada, or whatever regulation to apply. Get to know and understand those requirements as a developer, because management very often don't understand it.
Yes. Okay, great advice. But we keep other advices to, especially related to coding, to the episode when we write code for mobile application, and maybe we keep that, because you have a lot of advices for developers. And when you speak about these mistakes, there is people said maybe, okay, but all our application need to be secure, because sometimes security from mobile side, it's not very important. Imagine that we have what we call e-commerce application, etc. And for my point of view, I didn't have any experience in security to be honest. For my point of view, the backend is the using system like GWT, what we call API gateways to secure. For me, it's not necessary to have a lot of things to secure. Maybe password, some critical things in the keychain, but it differs from the application, the type of the application.
You're absolutely correct. Like if you have an app like Amazon,
Yes.
you can order stuff online. First, everything is cloud-based, so you can go on the web, you can order your products, see your list of orders, your current activities, you can search product, you can buy a bunch of stuff, and everything can be done on the web. And the web is by default almost insecure, because when a user is in the browser, they can like JavaScript debug what's going on, so they can do everything. So the security in a system like that has to be done on a server side from the API perspective. The cloud side, it's almost you can almost ignore it, because everything is cloud based. Like when you want to see your list of orders, you make an API request. It's not stored on the device. It's just web queries being made. So in those kinds of apps, absolutely, the security on the device is like second, third concern. The primary concern is the APIs. So there are some instances like that where you can forego a lot of those on-device worries. But there are still things that you can do to increase the security on mobile compared to the web. For example, on the web, trusting the SSL certificate, the user can always bypass it, because even if the browser says that the SSL certificate is not valid, you can click visit the site anyway.
Yes.
But on iOS, you can, when you have a mobile app, you can bake that into the app and say, if the SSL certificate is not the one I expect, get the fuck out of here. So there's these kinds of things that you can do in a mobile app. So even though the API should be really where you should put your main focus on security, there's nothing preventing you from increasing the security level so that users are safer on mobile. So you can say to them, you know what, if you want an okay experience, you can go on our web. But if you want to be safe, use only mobile.
Okay.
So you can even though there's no way really to protect the web from anything that is happening, you can still have a mobile app environment because you have the iOS security controls, because you have the sandbox,
Sandbox
because you
box.
have everything, the keychains and everything else. You can build a much more secure environment for your users. And so you have the API security, but you can also build a much more secure contained environment on the mobile phone and provide them a safer experience than the web users would. So of course the web is still web. So if you offer both, a hacker can choose the weaker of the two platforms to attack, and they'll most likely go on the web to attack. But at the very least, you can give the users option. And maybe if you want to push security even more, you can say, I don't want my account to have access via the web. Like I would love to have an Amazon app that is super safe on my mobile, but doesn't allow me to go and make purchases on the web. Because if I always do my purchases on mobile and you can secure the mobile front, why would I want an open account on the web? Maybe I don't.
Okay.
But it's something that the companies and the industry can get better at. It's understanding where the weaknesses and the strengths are and guiding the users toward a preferred experience and allowing them to disable the paths that are less secure, increasing the user's security on their account. We don't see a lot of that in the industry. I hope we will see more and more of that in the future. But obviously, that's up to the various companies and industry to do it on their own.
Yes, I asked this question because I don't like that people understand that in every application we need to in every client application, iOS or Android, we need to make a huge security, etc. And we try to decide if because I know that lead developers and technical lead, when they try to make security things, they come to over engineering security and they didn't understand what they need to do, etc. Because there is little of people that have your understanding, your knowledge about what we should do and what we shouldn't do. It is important to make this
It's easy to
divide.
over-engineer. The same way as it is easy to not do it properly, it's also easy to go
Yes.
overboard. Um, but it all comes down to making the security assessment and doing the audits. So when you make a security assessment and a risk assessment, you basically identify, again, what are all the parts that you're storing. And again, if it's a grocery app, I don't care that people know that I'm buying orange juice or milk or bread every week
Yes.
or how many I buy. Sure, there's some data that can probably be inferred from that. Maybe one of my lists is called like a specific store name, and then another list is called another specific store name. Then they can infer that because I go to that store and that store, I'm that kind of users. So there is some data to be inferred from that, but it's not as safe as like keeping PDF of contract that I sign on my device. That is a lot, needs to be much more protected, or my geolocation for my jogging routes. These are physical security. They can mean life-threatening. It can mean someone getting abducted or killed. So yeah, you need to literally make an assessment of like, what's the worst case scenario of this data getting leaked versus this data getting leaked. It can be significant.
Yes, and maybe we can inspire it from some consortium like OWASP. We spoke about this tools, this kind of site that they came with a lot of rules about security, and we can inspire it from him. Maybe you can speak about OWASP a
Yeah,
little
for
bit.
sure.
Yes,
The OWASP MAS, the mobile application framework, is really, really, really good. They provide a lot of a full breakdown list of everything that you can check into an app. And
yes.
this is where it's easy for lead developer that don't fully understand security to get completely
Mm.
lost and go overboard. Because they just look at all that list and they're like, we need to do this, 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 this,
Yes,
and
yes,
that.
yes.
use that as a checklist, and they need to go through that whole checklist in order to be safe. But so the OWASP MAS is a really good guide to learn what are the different things I need to look for and be aware of. And then they also give you unit test examples of like how can you validate that your code actually fulfill the requirements, like document encryption or keychain access, all of these kinds of things. So there's everything's in there. It's super well detailed. The OWASP MAS has some very brilliant people working on that, which is awesome.
Yes.
Like Sven Schleier, for example, is one of the people working on the OWASP. He's super brilliant. Follow him on LinkedIn if you haven't.
Okay.
And then there's also another document that has been released by the NIST in the United States called the Zero Trust Architecture. And any developer worth their salt that really wants to do security in the coming years or even now today, they really need to go and dig into that document, the Zero Trust Architecture, and understand what it means, because it completely change how you deal with the network. You have to really think about like isolation of individual components. Like right now, most of the apps, they speak to the server. They consider it's like, as long as I'm speaking to my API, I can give it anything I want. Like I can, my endpoint, like I give it my name, my email, my contact, my addresses, my geolocation. As soon as it hits the API, I'm good to go. But in a zero trust architecture, you push that forward 10 miles. And you're like, what is the minimum information that I need to give to that API endpoint so that I can get access? So for example, let's say you're trying to send a document from one person to another. You no longer just give the document to the API. You're basically asking the API, okay, what is the other person's encryption key? And then the API tells you, okay, this is the encryption key of the other user. You encrypt the document and you give the encrypted document to the API so that in case someone, a hacker, is inside of the API, they cannot get access to the document because it's the encryption key of the other person. And you need a way to validate that this is the encryption key of the other person too. So you validate that, you send the document over, and then only the other person can decrypt it. People on the server can no longer have access to the document. So, or if you have, let's say you send files for scanning. Let's say you send images to the server, and there's a PDF flattening or image filtering thing that happens in the cloud, and they give you the image back.
Yes.
Obviously, it's not the API front end where your API calls comes in that's going to do the image manipulation. Most likely, you're going to call an API. The API is going to put it in a pipeline somewhere, and then the other script is going to grab the images one after another that are in the pipeline, do the manipulation, gives it back to the API, and then your software gets it. But there's multiple servers and services involved. So what you can do is you have a public-private key developed for the image manipulation code. You have a public API key for the API, and then you have your app. So your app knows that it needs the image filtration service. It's going to ask for the public key of the image service, encrypt the document that only the image service can get access to, send the encrypted document to the API. The API gives the encrypted document to the image pipeline, and then the image pipeline decrypts the image, processes it, re-encrypts it, gives it back to the API. So again, if there's a hacker at the API or firewall levels or anything like that, they never have access to your images, users' data, and whatnot. It's called zero trust. Even if it's within the enterprise architecture, you only give access to only the one part that's absolutely needed. Anything else that is within the cloud should not have access to that data. So it requires building APIs differently. It requires knowledge and understanding on how can I split my different services and architecture in order for me to be able to do what I'm supposed to do, but do it so that any other parts of the architecture cannot have access to the documents or the data. So it asks you to do things really differently than what we're used to. So understanding what zero trust architecture is, how it works, what it means, what are the implications on my API design is a lot.
Very important.
It's very important. That's not covered in the OWASP MAS. They won't talk about zero trust because that's not their area of concern.
We will share this documentation about that.
So the NIST, it's called NIST. That's the organization that actually writes the document. And the document itself is called Zero Trust Architecture. If you do a Google search for it, you're going to find it.
Yes. Great.
Some of the other tools and resources.
Yes. You can continue.
You should probably use something to do static code analysis to verify if, like, just do an analysis of your code and see if there's something easy that it will find. A good tool for that is SNYK, SNYK. Another one is SonarCube. Both of them have free versions, if I'm not mistaken. Then there's like commercial codes and solutions like Veracode, checkmarks, or even white source that you can install and that will do some static analysis of your stuff. I suggest courses. Educating your developers is great. You can send them to securing.pl. Securing.pl has a bunch of courses about web development, mobile development. They train you. They can even do red team versus blue team. That's when one team attempts to break your app and the other teams attempt to defend against it, which is great. There's conferences that you can go to. Black Hat, DEF CON, the OWASP Global AppSec. So there's a lot of different conferences like that where you can go. Your local iOS developer meetings, if you go there, you're going to meet other developers like me or you or whatever, and you can have a conversation and start talking about security. Hey, what are you doing for security for your app? Like, do you use Keychain? Do you encrypt your data before putting it in Keychain? I heard that from a broadcast, and they're like, no, that man, why would you do that? And then these conversations bring up knowledge
maybe improve
between developers. So this is great to even on social networks. Find knowledgeable developers, people that talk about security. Some names that come to mind like Matthias Frilingsdorf, Sven Schleyer, Tiana Rasfindralambo. Sorry, I butchered that name. Brian C. Reed, Carlos Holguera, Ricardo Poffo, Erez Yalon, Michael Long, all very knowledgeable people that you should follow on LinkedIn if you haven't.
And also waiting for your book that you spoke.
True. I'm writing a book along with the Yaheldin Elkewade, I think is his last name, which hopefully will be released very soon. We're in the final phases of review and code updates. But there's that book that will be coming out soon. There's also security groups and companies or forums, newspaper, magazines that exist on the topics. So Krebs on Security is a really good one. Metasploit, the Hacker News, Dark Reading, GB Hackers, Cyberscoop, all good sites to put on your normal navigation flow, daily, weekly review of articles. They often have very interesting stuff about security that you can follow.
Yes, great. Yeah, because people, I think they thought, but by why we can start? We have a lot of articles, a lot of reference that Dave shared with us about how to begin with security, how to start with iOS security basics, meetups, books, articles, OWASP security.